Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Today's conversation is a little different. My guest, Justin Anderson, has not directly experienced infertility or the loss of a child, but after losing his grandmother and carrying that grief in silence, he began exploring how stories and folklore can give shape to emotions that often feel impossible to explain. In this episode, we talk about invisible grief, why so many people feel unseen in their pain, and how storytelling can become a way to honor love that still remains. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Justin Anderson. Justin, do you mind giving us a brief introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yes, my name is Justin Anderson. My pen name is Jay Valorn. And I write, I went from saying I write like dark fantasy that focuses on mental health to kind of just saying that I write stories and that focuses on invisible weight. Originally, I wrote a story and it was supposed to be something simple, and my trauma, my grief came out from losing my grandmother, and it turned into a dark fantasy with mental health as a magic system. And then that expanded into folklore that focuses on different occupations and different sets of people who may have lost or who may have grieved that carry this invisible weight that I feel like it deserves to be seen.
And I really love that you're doing that because, we're such a society that is not very grief literate, and we're so uncomfortable with grief, and it's nice to see that there are people that can do it in or can talk about it and bring light to this in a creative way.
I agree.
So was losing your grandmother, was that really your first experience with grief, or was it just your biggest grief experience?
I love that you've asked that question. This is the very first time that I've actually been asked that question, and you were directly perfect when you said, that was my first experience with real grief. I've had other family members pass, but I never had anyone close to me. It was kind of the family members you see, during the holidays or once or so a month. But my grandmother, she was the first person to hold me when I was born, and she lived with us. So for my whole life, those 17 years, I seen her every day. So it was both really my first and my biggest experience with grief.
And I know being a male, grief is not always something that you are taught to show or to, express. So was that anything that you struggled with?
Yes, majorly. Being a male during that time, we're always taught that you're not supposed to grieve or you're not supposed to cry, which is part of grief in a lot of cases. You're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to be vulnerable. You're not allowed to be weak. And growing up in the household with a single mother, we also had that extra weight of, well, you're the man of the house. It didn't matter your age. If you were the male, then you were the man of the house at whatever age you were. So I felt myself trying to fulfill both roles. I was trying to be there for my mother, be the man of the house, and not be sad because she was grieving, and it it just didn't work. I felt myself suppressing my grief by just being angry all the time. And I was just so mad and I didn't understand why. I just was like, okay, I'm just this ball of anger. Any interaction with me most of the time was probably pretty unpleasant for most people because it took very little to set me off. So that was the stereotype in the media, in the male culture that was pushed on me and that I carried, and it just wasn't helpful at all.
And I imagine, people see anger, not realizing that anger is a big part of grief. I mean, that is, definitely a phase that we all go through. And I think people probably don't look deeper than that, so they probably just see someone who's angry, but they don't see that underneath, like you were really grieving and didn't have an outlet for that.
They truly didn't. and it was bad enough to where I do know that it was concerning, for my doctors and things of how angry I was and things of that nature. Now, there nothing positive came out of me being so angry and dealing with, my first real loss, then trying to fulfill the role of being like the male of the house and trying to be there for my mom. And it just kind of was overwhelming for me. And I didn't know how to deal with that vulnerability. Talking about it wasn't something that I could really do. And therapy wasn't an option for me at that point because, again, that vulnerability wasn't allowed to be there as a, male. I was told, this isn't what we did. And that led to a lot of a lot of bad thoughts and choices. I do think therapy back then would have been really useful for me. But one of the things I kind of realized with therapy, being in therapy later on in life and looking back then, is that I think therapy would have, I don't think it would have worked for me. Even if I did do it, it would have been useful, but I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to see that, when you look back on it, thinking, well, maybe it would have been different. And then you're like, well, or maybe it wouldn't have been.
Exactly. And I think I've started thinking about different concepts to help not only myself understand myself better, but maybe help other people understand things and figure out things as well. And one of the things that I thought about is looking at the word grief. I like to say that there's two doors in grief. There's the I door with the letter I, and then there's a E door with the letter E, for externalization. And a lot of times in therapy, the externalization isn't talked about. When you normally enter therapy, it's a lot of I, you have to come ready to be like, I'm hurting, I'm vulnerable, I'm sad, I'm mad. And I wasn't at the point of being able to say I felt anything. I really didn't understand how I felt. But I could listen to songs, poetry, and I could say those people, those songs, those poems represented how I felt, that externalization, distancing myself from the I. And I think if I would have been able to find therapy, or during the time I wasn't able to, I had writer's block from it as well. If I could have been writing, I may have been able to kind of process it like I did 18 years later.
So was writing something that you've always had a passion for then?
Yes, it was something I was just always really good at that people kind of recognize me for. And I realized that looking back at it, that I always always wanted to make people feel something with my writing. I remember being young and in grade school and having to write a Halloween story. And it was a very pivotal moment in my life because, you write the Halloween story and I'm trying to make the ghost say boo. And anytime you hear a ghost say boo, it's always that fluctuating, it's that boo, to make it sound eerie or scary. And I remember I was so frustrated because I couldn't convey that through my writing. Even if you extend a letter, it just sounds longer. And eventually I landed on the notion of if I wrote it wavy, like making the letters wavy, that you would say it that way. And I remember my teacher during a parent teacher conference talking to my mother, and she thought it was the most cutest thing that I did that. But when she said it and read it to my mother, she read it in that fluctuating pitch. And it made me feel so happy because it was like, it worked. She got it. And that kind of started, as I progressed, I wrote poetry and stories just pretty much anything. And my sister was a big part of my life with writing because I started, this is back when they call them, soaps or soap operas. She would watch a lot of those, and I felt myself just testing out my skills. She was bored of watching some of hers, and some of them were on hiatus. And I was like, I could write that. And she was like, no, you can't. And so I started
Like, challenge
trying to write.
accepted.
Exactly. I started writing soap operas, and the first one where she's like, no. But eventually I got to a point where she was interested in actually reading it. And it became this challenge where she would give me, I think for her own self, so she had something to do. But, being young, it's like, oh, you're challenging me? Uh-huh. And so I would sit there and write different types of stories in order to see if I could get her to read them. And that, looking back on it, that really helped me expand and understand how to take in different types of sources and then put something back on a page that actually carried weight and depth.
I love that. I love, the that you were making the way to write boo just perfect, and and you had your moment, like you did it,
Yes.
So I'm curious, what kind of got you interested in folklore specifically?
What ended up getting me interested in the folklore was really my first piece that I started with was the Song of the Hollow Mother. And it was after hearing a piece that I read a story, and it was about a mother who unfortunately lost a child. And I read it and I just felt this need to externalize the feeling I was feeling. And this piece of folklore came out in essence within my world. So Hollowborn in my world are just manifestation of grief and trauma. So the veil, which is what holds my world together, the cycle of death, life and death is broken. So grief and trauma, they can't go through the process of, life and death. So they fall back into the world. And that's where I was like, this grief would be really heavy on this person. And it led me to writing this piece in order to acknowledge what I just read, because a lot of times, especially with social media, it's just horrible. You read, somebody could post something so deep, and people would find a way to, oh well, it's your fault, or these negative things. And it's like, this person is hurting, and they just want to be witnessed. They want to be seen. They don't necessarily want you to fix their problems. They just want to know that they still exist within this world with this grief and this weight that they're carrying, and that is so heavy. And that led me to writing multiple folklore, trying to witness these people who are carrying this invisible weight.
Are there other types of invisible grief that you've done pieces on?
Yes, so I've done a few on mothers, and acknowledge kind of how in some cases, society fails, where you may see them struggling, and or I'll say women in general, because there's a lot of times where we'll see women carrying a lot of weight, and there's nothing that's done until after it's too late, after the break. And you could be showing signs, you could be showing marks or tears or angry or just different visible signs. And instead of saying, hey, you, not asking you necessarily, are you okay? But let me carry that for you. And it doesn't mean, physically grocery. That just means like making your life less stressful, depending on what's going on, whether it's a friend, an employer, a loved one. or your spouse. And that leads to, you know, the break where now you're depressed or now you're having different emotions. And I've written about women. I've written about one of my bigger pieces is burning guilt, which touches on survivor guilt that like firefighters and first responders experience, where, you know, they save people, but they may lose one or two. In society, we focus on how many they saved. You saved 12, 13, but I lost three. And they carry that loss. You know, while we're calling them heroes, we're not acknowledging what they're carrying. They're focusing on that number of how many they didn't save. And then I got a few pieces that deal with, you know, a loved one, my uncle, his wife has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I got a piece about that type of love because there's a lot of times where we don't acknowledge people who are in a relationship, especially, you know, depending on if your religious parties may not either. For his case, they don't. It's like you can pray this away or you're not praying hard enough. So he can't really accept, you know, what he's going through. He can't really grieve because in their eyes, he's not praying or not believing hard enough. And, you know, his wife could get better through Jesus. And that puts him in this middle ground of, well, what do I do? You know, am I not believing hard enough? Am I failing? Now I'm failing my wife and I'm failing from a religious standpoint, as opposed to accepting and going through the process. And one of the things I realized, I wrote one talking about mourning without a funeral. And that really touches on kind of what he's dealing with. A lot of people don't understand that you can grieve someone who's still living, because in cases you're not necessarily grieving that they're dead, but you're grieving the version of them that you will never meet. In certain cases, for him, I'm sure he thought he would get old. And I mean, they have been together for 30 plus years. So he's thinking long lifetime. He never thought, you know, she would forget who he was, or she would get panicked thinking that he left her because he went into the store or things of that nature. And being able to grieve those versions that you pictured of this person, and it's something that you may need to do while this person is still living. You can still go through this grief of what's missing.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. And I feel like people like you said, saying, well, you're not praying hard enough, you're not doing this right. I mean, I feel like a lot of people just try to put the blame back on the person who's actually grieving. And it's like, okay, but can't, like you said, we just want it to be witnessed and acknowledged and, have somebody like say, I see you, I see what you're going through.
Yes, exactly. And that's all it takes for some people, is to feel seen and witnessed. And that has kind of become my mission within building this world, is to give, I use a term like shelter. Like when I hear a story that is really passionate or, you know, heartbreaking to me, I feel this need to build. And normally it's a folklore or something around those lines, but I call it a shelter, you know, to help someone, you know, who's being rained on or being, you know, or who's in the midst of that storm, to know, hey, there's someone who sees you, there's someone who witnesses you. I'm not telling you that you need to walk out of this storm yet, because you may not be at the point of being able to leave this storm. You may be within that grief to the point where you need to sit here a little longer. But when you're ready, here's some things that can maybe assist with that. And that's the world that I started to try to build, the world that I wish existed when I was in the midst of my grief. I decided that I would build for other people.
Do you think having what you've created now would have helped your younger self?
I believe it would have, because being able to read different things and feel like this is me or this is for me is a way that can help you maybe explain things that you couldn't before. There's times where you hear something and you're like, oh, I love that saying, because that saying is saying exactly what you felt, but you could never come up with those words to say it. And that's where my hope is, giving kind of a language for people to be able to say things that they're feeling and maybe uncomfortable with, again, the I feel this way, I feel that way. They can now say it in a different way that allows them to express it, but still feel less vulnerable than saying I feel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like you see a quote or something you like, and it's easier to just share that quote without even any context sometimes. Just share the quote and it's like expressing yourself. But you going out there and saying, I feel sad because is a lot different.
Exactly. And that's, I did for Mental Health Month for May, I did a folklore piece that involved 12 voice actors in total. Well, 13, because it included an intro, outro, and then 12 different voices. So 13 voice actors in total. And it took the sanctums of my world, or cities, however you want to view it, of my world. And it basically kind of went through the inner critics that people may have. So in my world, each sanctum kind of has its own traditions, its own values. I have a war sanctum, Kelvoran. So that kind of leans on the stereotype for male. There's no weakness. If you're weak, you're exiled. They take, the whole concept of being strong overly literal. I have one Umbrius that takes in the concept of being grief. You're allowed to grieve, you're allowed to listen to people, but your process of grieving is a solo journey. So you're not allowed to lean on anybody, and that leads to issues. So each sanctum has its own views. I ended up seeing a piece that made me, well, a TikTok event that made me write that, of a child that had a disability and just enjoying life playing a sport. And adults in the comment section were so nasty about how this little 6-year-old is making it unfun for the normal kids. And they use words like that, the normal kids. He's not going to be able to go pro. He's not going to be able to do this. And he should just play this other sport. I don't know why you allow him to play this. And the mother was so amazing throughout all those comments. She never cussed them out. She never yelled. She never got angry. She just responded. And I was reading the responses, and even though she wasn't rude or anything, I could read the exhaustion in her words, that she kept responding to all these, and I use the term adult loosely, but who should have been adult.
Adult
um,
age, maybe not.
exactly, adult age. She responded to all of them. And when I put my phone down and I thought about it, and I'm like, what if this 6-year-old or 8-year-old was to see this, 2, 3, 4, even 10 years from now? What would they think about themselves? And that started what would the world call it? What the world calls it. And it's these thoughts that I felt like may run through his mind depending on the people he encounters, and it became like I said, a multiple post on TikTok, and it was surprising to see how people interacted with it. And, I had some heavy ones, like that talked about ambition. Selena would talk about your ambition and how it was delusional and foolish, and you're just avoiding interacting with society, or one of them talked about, you just basically were like a waste of space, and, you should have just never been here, like some heavy voices within there, with, of course, proper caution and disclaimers around it. But I was surprised to see the people who resonated, the voices I expected people to resonate with, weren't the ones. The heavy ones were the ones where I got a lot of comments that this felt like something they were dealing with, or, they would post comments about things their parents said or things how they were treated. And I was like, wow, this became something that voice things that these people may have never said otherwise. It became their voice for them.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that sounds like such a powerful piece, and I mean, first of all, I have to say well, I can believe it because people are horrible on social media, but just the things that people say and it's, but that's a subject for another day. But I do like that that you took that and made it into something that clearly resonates with so many people. And I think probably those heavier voices are what resonate because those are the things we don't talk about, and those are the things we're not allowed to say or that we're afraid to say.
And you just really gave me some clarity, because I didn't really understand why, but what you just said makes so much sense now, that these are the things that we can't say. And a lot of times, if we say those heavier things, if we say it in the workplace, we may end up fired or laid off or something. If we say it to a friend or family member, they may not know how to take it. With a society that likes to fix, it becomes awkward if they don't try to give you advice. Like if I don't try to say, oh, it'll get better or anything like that, then the conversation for most people feel awkward. They're not really able to just witness you sharing and listen and kind of just be there for you within that space without trying to fix it. So I think, like you said, we know that, so we don't say it, because it's like, well, it's just gonna get awkward, or they're gonna tell me it's gonna be okay, and it's like, I know I'm not okay. Like, don't just tell me I'm going to be okay. It's gonna get better. No, right now, in my mind, nothing is gonna get better. And as much as that sounds bad to like some people, that's okay to be there. I was there where I did not think anything in this world would fix a situation. And I had to kind of sit there with that until I got out of it, because no matter what you told me, I didn't feel that.
Yeah, and then just being told, "Oh, it'll get better," or "Just pray more," or "Just do this." You're like, "Okay, well, you're just throwing words at me. Like you're not hearing me and you're not really seeing me. You're just like you said trying to fix it and you can't fix me right now."
Correct. And that, I think, is the biggest thing. Just sometimes sitting there with someone, like, I feel like for most people, they may have had at least one experience where someone just sat with you, and you may not have even spoken to that person, but just that presence of, okay, I feel better because there's just someone here with me. And I think that's where, we need to kind of work towards, instead of always trying to fix, because especially if you don't really know what that person's going through. I know I have depression, and my sister and my wife, while I know they love me dearly, they don't understand the depression portion of me, because I feel during those times that my children don't love me, my wife doesn't love me, and we've had fights over that at one point, because it was like, how could you think this way? And I'm like, when I'm not depressed, I understand from a logical standpoint, I'm thinking illogical. But when I'm depressed and I'm deep in it, it seems so real. And it's hard for a lot of people to understand that how how your mind is so altered during states of depression and grief and sadness that even things that you have all the signs for that it would be different, the hugs, the unprompted caring, you just look at differently. You're like, well, they're only doing that because they want me to buy something, or maybe as a woman they're only doing that because they want me to you know not make them look bad, or they don't want me to cry, or different things. For me as a male, it's like they're only doing that because I provide. If I lost my ability to provide, they wouldn't care for me, you know and that goes also back to the stereotypes of what males are supposed to do, so it spirals you.
Yeah, people don't understand like when you're deep in those states of grief and depression and loss and anxiety or all of those strong feelings that it's not like we're making a choice to be sad. We're not like, you know what, I'm choosing to be sad today. It's like
Exactly.
you can't always help how, it's literally your brain doing it and you can't just snap out of it.
Yes, and I think that type of understanding would go a long way. And I praise my wife because even though she doesn't understand it fully still, she understands that just being present is what helps me most. So where we used to fight, because it was like, for her, it was this combat of you're saying I don't care and I care. So now I'm fighting to show you I care, which made it worse and pushed me away more. Now it's just kind of like she will do things, if I'm laying in bed, she'll find ways to get me out of bed. And we don't really talk about why until I'm ready. Again, sometimes you're not ready to talk, and you know, but I may tell her something, or I may show her something I worked on that expresses it, which she's gotten used to that, and she understands, oh, okay, he's not just showing me this work because he's proud of it, but it means something more. And these were, layers that eventually helped me and her communicate better, that okay, this is how he communicates and how he needs me to communicate and interact with him during this time. And, I had to learn that with her, because I remember she had postpartum. I was not ready for that. Oh my gosh, I was. And the most memorable moment of that was I remember her telling me, "This is all your fault. You got me pregnant. You did this. You made me go to school." And I was just like, I'm just looking at her like big eyed, and I'm like, I I don't know what to really say. Luckily, in all honesty, me being shocked what it was truly what was best for that situation, because I would have more than likely argued otherwise. Well, I didn't just get you pregnant, and
Yeah, like, and that
but
wouldn't have gone down a good road, right?
exactly. And what she needed for me was just to be there. And me being shocked, the only thing I knew what to do was just to sit by her and hold her. And that's what she needed, was just for me to be there, not try to fix anything, not try to be like, well, let's go to the doctor, let's go to therapy. She just needed me to be there for her and be there with her.
And I think it's so great that you two have been able to work through things like that because I know a lot of people can't really do that. They're just like, well, I don't know what you want from me, or, they can't like take the time to really see like what the other person actually needs from you.
I agree. And it makes a big difference. And this has also made a big difference in, again, how I'm interacting with different, people in the world, and different people in different situations, with my folklore, with my writing. I try to really understand what the other side needs, because I hated the way that mental health and trauma was expressed in the world in the media. Um, you see so many movies, so many books where all this traumatic stuff happened in the beginning or in the moment, and then it just goes away. There's no resolution. There's no, you know, okay, this person worked through this. A lot of times there's no type of discussion to be had. There's a lot with women, who have kids and postpartum, and they just make you guys look like you're just crazy and angry and just, but there's no work to show that this isn't how it really always is. This isn't true. There's nothing to counter that.
Yeah, I feel like in the media it's, either I mean, sometimes like, okay, you go to therapy or, oh, they just met the right person who helped them through and then suddenly they're better. Or, it's like this magical fix and it doesn't show, like you said, all of the work that goes into it because grief is a lot of work. It is exhausting and it is tiring and it is not something you fix overnight.
Correct, correct. And they don't show any of that. And it gives a completely, false understanding. And the thing that I've kind of learned as I've been doing this and I've talked to, firefighters, paramedic, first responders, in order to make sure I get things accurate, is me as a grown up, you know, 36 years of age, I am also very clueless about different occupation and different things that I don't interact with. I never knew until a buddy of mine who was a volunteer EMT and a firefighter, when they do CPR, it's not like the TV shows. you know, on the TV shows, it's just like chest compressions, 1, 2, 3, and then everybody pops up and all that. He's like, no, it's not like that. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you're breaking ribs. He's like, think about how hard you have to press to compress somebody's heart. He's like, you're gonna break their ribs. He's like, there's really no other way. He's like, and you don't wake up and just pop up. He's like, you're gonna be groggy. You're gonna be out of it. He's like, yeah, it's nothing like TV.
And that is definitely, yeah, not something I knew either because I mean, I know that TV isn't like, 100% accurate all the time, but when that's what you see over and over, that's the image you see, then that's what you come to believe. So, like with mental health and grief, what you see on TV and the movies repeatedly is what you start to believe is how it really is.
Exactly. And it was eye opening for me to realize. I was like, well, I feel kind of dumb now. And
I didn't
it
know
makes
either.
sense. But then it gives you kind of a perspective on, well, if you're doing that and I'm trying to save someone's life, but I have to inflict harm, even if it is for the good, what does that do to you mentally? You understand that, well, I got to perform CPR on this person, but I'm going to break their ribs, which is going to hurt and different things like that. You know, if you're not a person who wants to harm someone, then you have like a bridge you have to cross. And how do you deal with understanding that, well, yeah, I saved their life, but I'm also put this person in the hospital that they have to heal from something I did. It's kind of this push and pull feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it is, goes back to what you said about, first responders about, well, we saved 10 people but lost three, and people only see, well, you saved their life. They don't see the other part of it. They don't see the one you lost. They don't see the harm that you had to inflict to save their life.
Correct. And this is where, I was hoping with my work, I could bring awareness to different groups of that nature. And, especially for women, because I feel like a lot of your groups are highly unrepresented, and almost go invisible. Or I won't even say almost go, I would say go invisible to society. And it's like there there's a lot of different clothing or different things that represent, moments in life, but it's also not touching on the invisible way. It's either normally happy things or kind of like dark humor or overly positive, where it's like, I have some kind of depression and I'm still here and I'm gonna get over it. And it's like, well, I don't want to just say that to everybody. So
You're like, and who is that really helping, right?
exactly. And the person who's going to wear that is someone who's already pretty much on the other side of this. If they're that comfortable with wearing that openly says what they're experiencing and saying they're okay with it, then they're probably not the ones who really need the help at that moment.
Yeah, and I highly
And
doubt seeing somebody out with a random shirt on is, if someone's wearing a shirt like that and I have depression and me seeing that isn't gonna make me magically be like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna get over it too.
exactly. And for me, I remember seeing those types of clothing. It made me feel worse because I would be like, okay, what's wrong with me? This person seemed happy. So why am I still broken? And it did not help me in any kind of way. And that's where I really wanted to focus my attention and create things that kind of set within that spacing and acknowledge, there's not things made for that space. It's okay, well, kind of laugh it off space, and then I'm on the other side, but there's no middle ground. I've known people who've lost children, and there's everything kind of focuses on the fact that you lost this person, and then you want something with their face and images just everywhere. And some people may not be at that point, but then what do you do? And that's where I kind of focus on, well, can I make pieces that symbolize for them that connection still until they kind of work their way through things, and they may get to that point, or they may just prefer the symbolization. For one of my friend's sisters, I made a piece that was like, I'm not gone. I'm just further along the thread than you are. And it's that continuous bond. It's, that I'm here. My love and our love has taken a different shape and different form, but I'm not gone, you know. And I think that's where a lot of people need to hear, even for me with my grandmother, it helped me to think about her in my connection, not being as something that's just cut off, but it's just took a different shape, and we're still connected by, the threads, by our love, by our souls and connection. It's not severed or broken. It's just, in a different form now.
I really love that imagery. I mean, even with, pregnancy loss, even if we lose a baby super early, I mean, we're still connected, just like you mentioned, it's, a relationship that will always exist, even if it's in a different form.
Exactly. And I feel that, is in the important part to understand, it's not, you did, I'm not going to say you didn't lose anything, but it's not just gone. Another quote I had was like, even if you can't see me, I still hold the threads of your heart. And it was an image, of the child, holding the mother's broken heart with their threads wrapped around it, holding it together. And I feel those types of images is kind of what I've tried to build towards, because for a lot of people, they don't, they know they feel this heavy grief, and but they're not sure of what they need to understand. In my mind, it's like the important thing to understand is that love is still there. You're still connected. And like we just said, it just takes a different form now.
And that's what I love so much about everything, you've talked about and what you do is that it's not just about grief, but it's also about the love that is still there. And it's both acknowledging the grief, but also being healing and hopeful at the same time.
Yes. And that's that's one of the biggest things, is that, I don't want people to feel like it's this, I'm saying you got to get over the grief, like other things say, because it may take time, but being able to build something that can help you process what you're dealing with is just a win for me. Like, it doesn't have to be all over the news or anything. I just want to help people process and heal if they can.
So if people are interested in seeing your work, where would they go for that?
The best place would be valaurinverse.com. So that's VAELORINVERSE.com. That would be the best place. All my work, the folklore, the things I'm working on, the community that I'm trying to build. So I have a community portion I'm currently working on that would be not therapy, but my hopes is that it can become a bridge for people to work through, kind of like a self-help until you get into therapy. And, I would like to be honest and say, for me, I've been in therapy. I don't feel therapy is bad, but I do feel like therapy is like picking the right color or the right vehicle that you really love, because you may not like a particular therapist, and that's not anything on you, but it may not be the person that helps you understand yourself better. And I've learned going down this process that there's multiple frameworks as well. So there's like cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're processing and then you're doing counteractions to it. And that really didn't work well for me. I catastrophize one of the people, and that's one of the terms. I look at something and then I find the worst possibility at all of that. I'm like, oh, you're going to drive out there in the tire light zone. Well, it's not that my tire is just going to go flat. My tire is going to blow up. It's going to roll off. My car's going to flip over. I'm going to hit the neighbor's house and have to pay them. Like, I come up with so many different, and that's how my mind works. But, trying to always be like, okay, well, Justin, you're catastrophizing. Don't do that. That's not a real thought, go through it. It just didn't work for me. But there's other frameworks like narrative therapy, where it's more like writing, where you kind of re-author your story, or internal family system, which kind of deals with almost like the what the world calls it, folklore, those inner critics, that inner voice for people. So, just because there's not one, you have a bad experience, you may have to find the framework and the different therapists that may work with you if you're interested in therapy. But I have, a community side that I'm working with actual therapists to build, maybe things that would be useful for people, like taking my lore so they can externalize, and then they're able to produce their you know, issue or what they're looking for in a different framework. So instead of having to go through 4 different therapists and re-explain the trauma that you've experienced, you can just write it down once and then export it out into CBT or IFS or narrative therapy. So I'm trying to also build something that if people do want to get into therapy, they can also, find other ways.
Well, I think that's amazing that you're doing that. I think what you're doing now and what you're planning, I think it has already helped a lot of people, and I think it's going to continue to help a lot of people. So I really appreciate you for everything that you're doing and for coming on today and sharing it all with us.
I thank you for having me, and I deeply enjoyed being on, and I'm hoping that something that I've created or said would resonate and help somebody.
Thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your story with us. One of my favorite things from this conversation is the reminder that grief doesn't always need to be solved or fixed. We just need somebody to listen and witness. And sometimes we don't have the words for what we're carrying, and that's okay. Whether it's through stories, symbols, music, or simply having someone sit beside us in our pain, healing often begins when we realize we're not carrying it alone. If this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need it, or leaving a quick review on Apple or Spotify. These small actions help more grieving parents and families discover these conversations. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.